Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today. Very much appreciated. You've been on this journey. First of all, you're like a real product marketer as opposed to myself. I've been really kind of what I would consider a student of product marketing the last few years. I'd say about the last 4 years or so, give or take. Although I've said it before that it feels like product marketing has a lot of these attributes that a founder would have in terms of those early kind of, messaging and positioning exercises and these sort of things. And the fact that you sit in the middle of a lot of different stakeholders, but you're the real deal. Thank you so much for being on the show. And just why don't you take a quick second to tell folks a little bit about your career background and how you got into the product marketing world.
Yeah, so I've been in product marketing since about 2011. I'd actually been doing some product marketing functions before that, as doing like market research and a lot of content marketing. I started my career going with a product that was for developers and release engineers. It's a super technical thing. So it took me a long time to be able to learn that before I could even start doing product marketing for it. And since then, I've been doing going from one startup to the next, being sort of the first product marketer there, and all for technical audiences up until about 5 years ago when I started GrokSpark, which is the SaaS startup that I founded. And we create a messaging enablement platform for product marketers to solve some of the problems that I experienced when I was a product marketer working for complex technical products before that.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think your tool is the only tool of its kind that I've seen, and again, I've only sort of been in the space now for a handful of years, but it's super powerful. And I always hear the same thing when I chat with product marketers. They're like, well, it's really awesome to see product marketers these days starting to get tools built for them. So kudos to you. Well, let's dive in here into the proper messaging strategy and what that looks like, because it's a thing that no matter what you're focused on in terms of jobs to be done as a product marketer, it's really one of those jobs to be done that are really, owned by that PMM. How do we start to think about what that proper messaging strategy looks like?
Yeah, it's funny. Just thinking about how much messaging and positioning actually is part of the core of every product marketer's job. It's something like 92, 93% of product marketers say that they're responsible for positioning and messaging as far as their jobs go. But I like to say that product marketers don't really own positioning and messaging. It's something that we sort of have to bring together, and we manage the place where we keep the messaging and the positioning. But we have to work with a lot of different audiences within the company to get approval for that sort of thing, to get understanding from other groups, with product management, with sales, with senior leadership, with the rest of your marketing department. So really getting all of those groups together to help to shape those things is what I consider the responsibility of the product marketer in that way. And then how do we actually go about creating the messaging? It starts with solid positioning, first of all. If you don't have your positioning set, you can't create your messaging from it. So positioning, messaging, then copy that you see actually put onto the website and in your all of your communications, always in that order. And if you tweak your positioning, you're going to have to tweak your messaging, then you're going to have to tweak your copy, and it sort of flows down from there. But I always say that the best way to do it is to first know your product really well, assuming that the product already exists. If you're launching a brand new product, forget about that for a second. Start with step number 2, which is to know your audience. Know who you're trying to sell to, know what problems they have, what pains they have, what jobs to be done they have, what goals they're trying to accomplish. And really the most important part as to how those apply to messaging is to figure out which problems, which jobs to be done your product can address for them, how well they can solve those, how well they can address them, how well they can help them get their job done. I'm saying a lot of those different ways of going about it because different people like to do different frameworks for that. Some people like jobs to be done. Some people prefer pain points. And it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but knowing where each of those pains or jobs is on their list of priorities is extremely important. So being able to say that your product can help them do like number 7 on their list is not going to really help them a whole lot. It's a vitamin rather than a painkiller for them. It's not really going to move the needle. It's you can talk about pains that are low on their list all day, but at the end of the day, what's going to end up happening is even if they purchase your tool, they're not going to end up using it because they've got 6 or 7 things that are above them on the list of their daily activities, right? So that's always something to keep in mind with it. And I like to think of our jobs as product marketers as connecting the product that you know really well to the audience and sort of mapping out all of those steps along the process for what your product has in it, what features are in the product, what capabilities they provide to the user, how those provide benefits to them, what value they get out of it, what are the business outcomes for the larger audience within it. And my background is working on really, really technical products. So most of the time, the users are not the buyers. So being able to segment those groups out, at least at that level of buyers and users, is really, really important definitely for technical products. And I know this happens with somewhat non-technical products and where you have like B2B to C, where the end users or consumers or something like that, but then there's a whole buyer section that's in between when they actually purchase the product. So it's applicable to a lot of different industries.
Do you have any frameworks or any sort of hands-on tactics that have worked for you around discovering these priorities, these priorities, right? And being able to determine that, these are actual jobs to be done that fall into 1, 2, 3 kind of thing, right? Should we do focus groups, those sort of things?
So I've got a couple of different ways to go about doing it. Some of them you don't actually have to secure the interviews because interviews are really hard to get. The first way I like to do it before I go out and try to actually have conversations with people about it is to look at job descriptions for their titles and sort of graph out the similarities between those job descriptions. So what are listed as the top priorities for what those jobs actually are? And then going through that and saying, okay, well, it looks like this. It's kind of like what I was talking about with the PMA's report of like 92% messaging and positioning. If you looked at the job description for a product marketer, that's usually the top bullet point on every single job description for product marketing. It talks about messaging or owning go-to-market launches or something in that realm right up front. And doing that with the audience that you're trying to talk to, if you're primarily in the B2B space, it's super, super easy way to get an idea of where it goes. That way you can structure your interview script when you do get those interviews to be able to say, hey, you probably cover this responsibility. Where's that on your list of day-to-day stuff? Where do you spend most of your time? And I mean, most people I've ever had interviews with, it's always like answering emails. It's the top one. So you gotta get that one out of the way a little bit. It's kind of dig into what are they responding to? Who's asking them questions about things? What are they going after? Like product marketers, it's usually like, hey, I've got sales reps who are constantly asking me for assets for individual accounts, like what you guys do at Asset Mule, right? That's a super common thing that pops up, and that's a reason to dig into that and figure out how often that happens. And the other thing that's really that's really important for product marketers to be able to do is to look at the various personas that they're addressing and look at those jobs to be done and figuring out if those are the same pains, same jobs to be done across multiple personas. Because I would suggest that if it's the same pain, same problem, you don't really need to segment your messaging by persona in that case. You need to be talking more about the use case for that job or the pain that it solves and go that route rather than go too deep into like, hey, this is the difference for a developer or a tester or a sysadmin or something like that. If they're trying to accomplish the same task and they think about it sort of the same way, then you don't need to segment your messaging out for those individual job titles. You need to segment it out based on what they're actually trying to do.
Interesting. And that's, I think, super important for sales, our sales counterparts to really dig into and understand why is that the case, and how do I tell my stories in my sales conversation, taking this information, this messaging, this copy, talk tracks, those sort of things from product marketing, and then applying them to the sales conversation even across the various personas, right? Because I think that a lot of the time sales, like great salespeople will just get that, but they seem to be like, really, I don't want to say extra smart because that's probably not the case. It's more, I don't know, prepared or entrepreneurial or flexible, or maybe they're putting in more, preparation. We never know, right? What is that variable on the sales side? But understanding that this pain point really speaks to these specific, or not specific, but a vast array of personas, but them still being able to tell the story that resonates with the individual, even if they have a specific title, right? So like being able to kind of like adapt it, and so I think that kind of goes into enablement. And I wanted to get to something real quick that you said earlier, which was really being able to, as a product marketer, work with a lot of different stakeholders within the organization. How do you, as a PMM, in your experience, do that effectively? Because the way that you speak to a product manager that might come from a technical background is going to be a bit different than speaking to a salesperson that's, I don't know, I don't want to say any stereotypical stuff, but I mean, we are different a lot of the time, right?
Yeah, usually, we fit into different personality types. In that case, you don't often see the same type of personality between a product manager and a sales rep. But the way I like to think about it is within the company, you treat those groups as you would your external audiences, and you create you've got personas for your product manager, for your CEO, for your sales reps, and you figure out what their jobs to be done are. And then you figure out how your messaging and the stuff that you're creating for enablement and all of those things fit into what their list of day-to-day. It's very meta. But if you think about yourself and the work that you do within the organization as a product, it's a lot easier to be seen as valuable in the company. A lot of product marketers complain that nobody knows what product marketing does, or it's undervalued, or any of that. But if you treat yourself as the product, if you treat the work that your team is doing as the product, and you're able to think about those pains and the jobs to be done that they have, and you're addressing those in your communications and with the content and all the tools you're creating, they're going to see you as valuable. It's just natural.
Now, let's talk a little bit about segmentation. You mentioned, if the job's to be done the same or similar across certain personas, then that segmentation of messaging is not really required in the same way. But if we had to start to think about segmenting and what that messaging should be, how do we do that in an effective way?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get super scientific about it, I would suggest the Product Marketing Alliance course, the master's course on segmentation by Tamara Graminsky. I was on the course committee, like actually testing out that course, and it's one of the best courses I've ever taken on product marketing or anything related to that. And she has some incredible frameworks around how to do segmentation and how to actually go into your customer database and look at which deals are getting done by which ICP and trying to create those clusters within there. You can absolutely do that. But if you're starting out from scratch, if you're just trying to figure out where people are at the beginning, start with the job titles, start with their responsibilities, start to look at the jobs to be done, start to look at the pains and figure out where they're different. Figuring out where they're different is it's almost never going to be the case that your product is solving the exact same thing for everyone. So you're likely to have some persona or some use case differentiation between things. And your early adopters, most of them come to your product not because of the amazing use case messaging that you have. Most of them come because they're excited about the technology and they can imagine the use case themselves. And those people, you get kind of varying groups within your early adopters. And a lot of the times that's where you can pick out what their individual use cases are. So talking to those early customers is super important for trying to figure out what your main use cases are. And over time, you might launch a new feature, you might launch some integration or something that would allow them to be able to do something that they couldn't do before. And then all of a sudden you've got a new use case that you've got to cover. And yeah, I mean, you can get into the split between use cases and like industry vertical type messaging and all of that when you start to see which customers are adopting it. Like at GrokSpark, one of our biggest industries that adopts our product is cybersecurity. We didn't know why at first. It turns out they always have multiple products and they're really complex and their messaging kind of looks like everybody else's messaging. So segmenting out that messaging and mapping it all, super important to cybersecurity. Makes a lot of sense now, but we didn't know that when we launched the product. We just launched the product with the features and the capabilities and all that stuff. And then we started attracting cybersecurity companies as a result.
It's a great problem to have, though, right? That they started to kind of drive that, and you started to get that understanding. We were going to talk a little bit, I know, when we were prepping about SMB to mid-market and enterprise, just because there's so many nuances, right? The use cases, the jobs to be done, they really vary.
Yeah.
And so I think from an early stage perspective, when you're a large organization, I think you have a little more flexibility or runway around going after all of those segments, but when you're early on and you're launching something for the first time, how do you, in your experience, really kind of determine the messaging between, let's say, SMB, mid-market, enterprise, and determine what's going to be sort of leading, what's going to be the leading message at your go-to-market? I don't know. I don't think I've seen too many folks be able to target all three segments, enterprise and SMB at the same time. I mean, I even think that more mature businesses, larger organizations, still struggle with that. You seem to kind of just have to focus on one or the other, and it's very difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible. There are probably organizations, if I thought about it, that do a decent job, maybe GitHub, I don't know, there's those types of brands that sort of transcend that. But generally speaking,
Yeah.
like any feedback around that?
Yeah, I mean, it is super hard to do. I mean, even if you think of HubSpot, right? They were SMB mid-market for the longest time, and have only recently, since they launched CRM, have been able to start to pull away maybe some enterprise customers, because the CRM world is just dominated by Salesforce, especially on the enterprise side of things. So it's really hard to gain a foothold there. And yeah, I don't see a ton of companies being able to do that particularly well. When you're first starting out, it's somewhat difficult to separate your messaging from your go-to-market, as far as what your pricing packages are, how you're delivering it, whether it's product-led growth or whether it's a sales-led growth sort of model. It depends on the complexity of your product, and how difficult it is to be able to get it to actually be adopted with services or without services, if it can be done that way. You're going to get a lot more SMB on simple products that don't require services, and are going to be at the lower price point. But a lot of products, just the problem that they're solving doesn't get experienced at the smaller level, and sometimes it's way too big at the enterprise level. Like that's actually something that we've struggled with at GrokSpark when we first launched it, because we built it for people who were like solo product marketers, like I was. And it takes a somewhat technical product marketer to be able to utilize it in a way that's going to scale pretty well. We found sort of our niche is product marketing teams that are like 1 to 8, not enterprise teams. We've had like demos with big enterprise companies and stuff like that, and have not really been able to address a lot of the things that they need, because then you have to do like SOC 2 compliance. You have to do a whole bunch of stuff that is product related that they need, but just the way that your product is built, it's got to be in tandem, that you're building something with your product management team, and your messaging and all of that stuff has to go together. You've got to have a super coordinated effort in order to effectively message to the enterprise. SMB is a little bit easier, but they don't have the budget that the enterprise does, and you have to scale it. You have to sell at volume in order to do that. And so I would say, early on, pick a lane. You might be wrong, but you'll figure that out pretty quickly if you're wrong, and then try to develop something for one of the other markets and go after that. And yeah, I mean, companies like Zoom kind of did it accidentally when the pandemic happened. And it's not always a purposeful thing that it happens, but you find yourself building things. You mentioned GitHub. I actually worked at a company, my first product marketing job, my first product I ever launched was a GitHub competitor. And like 2012, back before they even had an enterprise motion, they had I knew for a fact, doing competitive intelligence, that they had one enterprise sales rep, and all of their business was coming from basically product-led developer adoption within companies. And I know that what HubSpot and what GitHub had done at the time was basically to figure out how many people within larger companies were using their products, using like the free or the cheap versions of their products, and then contacting a manager above them and saying, hey, all these people below are using this product. If you got an enterprise license, it would do this. And you can do that, but it's not covered in your messaging. It's covered by your sales reps that are actually going about figuring that stuff out in your CRM.
Totally, the uniqueness of PLG and all that. It's sort of
right.
A little luck and magic has to happen, I think, at times, because that that motion that you mentioned, that bottoms up is one that has worked wonderfully for a lot of organizations, but to get there is really, it's a challenge, right?
Yeah.
So, well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Tim. I know, we're coming up on time here, and want to respect your schedule. I wanted to ask you one last question, around
Absolutely.
how do we secure and run successful win-loss interviews? Because I know that's really, really important to be able to understand those to help us as product marketers.
Yeah, and that's something I've done a ton of win-loss interviews in my career, and I think it's one of the most important things in order to inform you on what's working with your messaging, what isn't working with your messaging, and even further back, positioning. So just being able to ask those questions to new customers as to what was the problem that you were struggling with, that you were hoping that the product was going to solve, and since you've started using it, what has it actually done that? And that's going to tell you whether or not your positioning is accurate too. Because if they came in thinking it's going to do one thing, and then a few months later, whenever you actually do the interview, they're a little bit frustrated with what the product has been able to do for them, then you might need to be adjusting your positioning so you're getting a better fit there. But being able to get the win-loss interviews, that's always a problem with the sales reps. Some of them wanting to keep those contacts really close, and maybe the account isn't as stable yet as it were. You're still going through implementation, or you still got some rocky requests coming in to the support line. Those are all things that do get in the way. I tried an approach at a previous company where I got the sales VP to buy into doing basically bonuses to sales reps who would get their customers to do case studies.
Interesting.
And
that's awesome.
we would, yeah. So it worked fairly well. It's a little bit difficult to get case studies out of brand new customers because they haven't had the results yet, right? But what the important part is to get those the crux of any case study I found is getting the early numbers before you get the product, and then being able to come back a year later and get the numbers as to how they've changed. Because there's zero chance that if you talk to them a year later without first recording the numbers, that you're going to get something accurate and say, yeah, we got 35% increase on our development velocity after we adopted your tool or something. They don't know.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Tim, thank you so much for being on the show. If folks wanted to connect with you, let's say via social, or learn more about what you're doing, consume some of your content, what are the best URLs or channels to reach you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's just Tim Hinds. And you can also check out GrokSpark.com if you want to email me there, and tim.hinds@GrokSpark.com. Feel free to spam me.
Cool. Well, congratulations on GrokSpark. And again, thank you so much for your time, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.